On the 28th of August 2019, my birthday, Spitfire Audio hosted an event at the Barbican, which is a London performing arts centre. It's kind of like a concert hall. I've definitely seen concerts there before. And this was to see the unveiling of their brand new collaboration with the BBC Symphony Orchestra. But none of us were to know this yet because, of course, it took over 3 years to make, involved hundreds of people, and wasn't leaked once. Now, the BBC Symphony Orchestra is a very special organisation for Brits particularly because it's a very central part of our music industry with things like BBC Radio and the performances of classical music and the coveted BBC proms held at the Royal Albert Hall every year. This was a particularly exciting event and, I don't particularly like to celebrate my birthday, so I thought, well, to shift that all too bright limelight off me, I'd go to this event and sit in a room full of strangers and talk about nothing else. Nobody could ask me, are you having a good day? Or sing me happy birthday, God forbid. We could just sit and chat about samples, and that sounded like a really nice idea, so I did. I went, I ate their free food, picked up their free t-shirt, and later bought their library. Now, I've come to love Spitfire over the years as I've developed my skills as a composer, and I'm also safe to refer to Christian Henson, its founder, as a friend, but I speak not from a position of blind bias, but more from earned respect. Now, one thing that Spitfire does remarkably well is to market compositional tools and educational content throughout the whole spectrum, from beginner to pro, from free to expensive. And I owe a great deal of my success as a composer, programmer, samplist for sure, but general musician to the content that I learned from their YouTube channel. I went through the undergraduate, I've been through the Royal College of Music, the music conservatoire route. And of course, I will talk more in later videos about what I've gleaned from that, whether I think it's maybe worth going to music college, things like that. But that's all in a totally different video. But the motto of this library was a universal starting point. And I did leave this event thinking, is a £900 library going to be the ubiquitous starting point for composers? Probably not. What I've come to appreciate via this new update with all these new tiers is the compatibility that it's going to have with a much wider spectrum of users. From the very sort of lower end of things with the Discover range, £49 or free, this could be great for people who are just getting started, maybe want to see what orchestral music can be like to sample from their new DAW. You can use it on GarageBand. But also you might just want to hear what the BBC Symphony Orchestra sounds like before upgrading to the Core or Pro range. For the Core range, I think that's going to suit most people. It's just got the one mix, but it's a really, really great starting place for that kind of broadcast quality sample library that is also really well priced. And then at the very kind of higher end of things, you've got a lot more mic positions, you've got the soloists, the leaders. I think that's going to prove very useful for the pros, but also for people who maybe have two systems. One at their desk where they have lots of RAM, they've got maybe a couple of computers that they can work from, and then that second computer that they can take and mode switch to the Core version. So as I say, when I kind of make investments in software or hardware or sample libraries, I like to make sure that I'm getting the most out of my money. And when investing in this, I was really attracted to the future-proofing, not only of the Atmos compatibility, but also of this technology and my requirements of the technology. Right now, I'm not going to have lots of mic positions open, but later down the line, I might be able to do that. And that's definitely a wise investment for me to make now. So today, as someone who's had this library for about 6 months now, I thought I'd give my initial thoughts on the library, but also I'm going to show you a piece of music that I wrote using the Pro version and then mode switch down to Core and then down to Discover and sort of ABC between them. So I want to start at the Spitfire website to begin with and just take you through the differences between them, not only in price, but also in what you're getting for that price. So first of all, the Discover range is £49 or free if you fill out a survey. And then we've got the Core version, which is £400, and the professional version, which is £900. Sometimes they're on discount, as you can see they are now. And if you're a student, you get, I think, 30% off on products. So that's always something to bear in mind. Now, they've got this mode switching technology, which effectively means that you can go into a session, say you've been working on a pro session, and you need to send it to your assistant, who might be using Core or might be using Discover. You can instantly switch from Pro down to Discover or Pro down to Core, and it switches all of the instances across, which makes it very easy to do. And I guess from the sharing and collaboration point of view, you're not going to be like, oh, I'm missing these samples. It doesn't work like that. It's all one plugin, which is quite intuitive, I think. So these are the various sort of categories between Discover, Core, and Professional. On the number of instruments front, you can see that we're missing quite a few. Although having just played around with Discover earlier today, I was really impressed by how many instruments are still in there. I mean, I wasn't expecting to see a harp and a celeste. You've really got the whole orchestra. It's just slimmed down. Now, the main thing here is it's only 200 megabytes, which is just incredible considering what you're getting for this. So we've got 47 techniques as opposed to 435 up on the Professional range, but the main thing that I think is going to be a limiting factor is the number of round robins. When you have a round robin, it's basically a take of a particular note. Sometimes this is the case for long notes, so that each long note has a slightly different sound to it, but particularly for short notes, the staccatos, the spiccatos as well, no player will play the same note exactly the same way every time. And you'll notice that if you're playing something that only has one round robin, you're going to get this slight kind of machine gunning effect, it's called. So with the Core and Professional range, where you get up to 8 different takes of the same notes at the same dynamic layer before going back to the beginning, it just makes it sound a little bit more realistic. Now, in terms of signals, you've got on the Professional range, you've got 20 signals to choose from. So you've got all the different mic positions that you would get throughout the orchestra live at all times. So if you've got a string sample loaded, you're still going to have the spill mics from the percussion, for example. You've got the normal things like the tree, the close mics, but a lot of options and a couple of mix options as well by Jake Jackson. Now, with the Core version, I believe this single signal is the Jake Jackson 1 mix, which for 95% of people, 99% of the time, is going to be what you're going to want to use. It sounds really nice, it sounds really balanced, and is quite an excited mix, I think, of the various mic positions. And I guess that's the same as well with Discover, although I don't know that for sure. Dynamic layers, we've got up to 3 on the Core on the Professional and up to just the single one on Discover. It's a sort of mezzo forte from what I remember. I was actually kind of surprised that there were only 3 dynamic layers in the Professional and Core versions. I don't think I knew that before I bought it. But, you know, in the crossfade that you've got all those little increments as you go up through the mod wheel. No legatos, although they have attempted to do this by sort of creating legato transitions. Normally what would happen is you'd have the attack of the note and the release of a note, and then it would go on to the next one. With legatos, it's the same situation, but instead of it just being a release that just fades away and starts up the next note, they've actually recorded the sound of you moving from one note to the next. So again, it's just to build up this realism. With the Discover range, you're not getting that, but you can have it as a sort of what would be like a monophonic synth, where you play one note and move to the next, and it cancels out the last one. But again, not as realistic as the Core and Professional. And as we go further down, you'll see that the solos and leaders are not available in Discover and Core, but are available in the Professional range. Something that's really useful about the Professional range is that you get the group ensembles, of course, but you've also got the leaders of every single section. So you've got a single bassoon or 3 bassoons, or the first violin leader versus the whole first violin section. And then there's the techniques editor, which basically allows you to create sort of presets for a set number of techniques in each that you can kind of save as a preset. So that's just something to know. The main difference between Core and Professional is the mic positions, and something that I think I was a little bit sort of on the side of caution with when purchasing Professional was that I didn't want my hard drive to be taken up just with mic positions. I think it could be useful for people to be able to have this Core version on their local system. For 23 gigabytes is great. To have the Professional version on an external drive, I think is really helpful as well. Personally, I use Mix 1 most of the time, or the tree mics most of the time. But as I said before in the intro, I don't see that as a reason not to invest in the Pro. I think there will always be cases where people will say, actually, I want to see what that sounds like up close. And to that effect, there's a really useful mic position called close wide stereo, I think it's called, or close stereo. And it effectively takes out the stereo image that you'd have associated with an orchestra. So whereas if this is your stereo image, the first violins would normally be over on the left, this would sort of position them more in the center. So that's great if you're doing kind of pop music, or you just want to move things around. You've got that flexibility there. That's all they've got on the website for now. Obviously they've got lots of templates and demos and stuff on spitfireaudiothepage.com, but I want to show you this in action now. So I'm going to switch over to a Logic project. Okay, so I've got a film here that I'm working on at the moment. I can't show you the film because it's still in progress, and so I'm not going to show you the whole piece of music either, but I'm going to show you 25 seconds, which should give you a little bit of a flavour, and I'm just going to ABC between the Pro, Core, and Discover versions. Now, this uses all BBCSO apart from the solo violin line, which uses the Spitfire solo strings. And the reason I've kept it as that and not moved across to the leader of the first violins is because I would consider this sort of like a live recording, and it'd be interesting to see how it fits alongside the Discover range when played together. So I'm just going to make sure that everything's loaded in. I think it is. And we need to make sure that we know what the memory is. So it's 4.21 gigabytes. And I'm going to bounce that out as Pro. So here's the Pro version. Okay, great. So it's a fairly simple piece. It's for an animation, as you can probably tell. So as you can see here, the memory for this takes up 4.21 gigabytes of RAM. For me on my laptop currently, that's 16 gigabytes. So, you know, it's a relatively small chunk, and that's with a full orchestra. As you can see here, it's got 5 round robins. If you compare this to something like the symphonic range, which has maybe 8 or 9, you know, you're not getting quite so many round robins. So where that storage is concerned, that kind of 600 gigabytes, that's really in the mic positions. And this isn't a kind of overview of that, but just to show you the various mic positions you've got so many to choose from. So that gives you the flexibility with Pro that you don't get with Core or Discover. The thing I was going to talk about was the load-in speeds. This is version 1.1.8 of the plugin, and it has seen a massive increase in efficiency. To begin with, it was quite slow to load things in, and I'm pleased to see that software updates are kind of progressively getting faster for load-ins. This would probably take 2 or 3 minutes for me to load in from an external hard drive where I've got samples on an SSD, and then loading into RAM from there. It'd be interesting to see as we go through Core and Discover just how much quicker it is to load stuff in. So I'm going to do that now. So the first thing I do is I click up here and change to Core, and then I need to right click this refresh button and switch all instances to Core. So as you can see, the GUI has changed a little bit there, and there we go. So it's 2.88 gigabytes. As you could see in that Pro version, I was using a little bit of the close and a little bit of the tree. So we're already reducing down to just one signal. And now that that's all done, I'm going to bounce in place. So it'd be interesting to see what happens here. There are some instruments like the bass clarinet that are not included in Core that are included in Pro. So that will be interesting to see. But most things, for 99% of people, 95% of the time, I would say the Core version is going to be pretty great for people. So here's the Core version. Okay, so pretty much the same. I'm going to go in first and check what happened to the bassoon, because as far as I was aware, we don't get leaders. So I'd be interested to see there. Oh, okay, so we do. So the only thing that we're not getting between Core and Pro is the violin 1 leader, violin 2 leader, the string leaders. But we are getting individual players. So horn, and then 4 horns, 1 trumpet, 3 trumpets. And so my single bassoon is an option there. But something I mentioned is bass clarinet is not an option. So I'm going to go and see what that sounds like. Do they remove it? as I suspect they did, or did they just tune something else down? Okay, so it is there, but it's not as a bass clarinet. Now, strangely, it still says it's there, but when you click on it, it's obviously not. So this is taken from, I believe it's a clarinet, probably tuned down. If I switch this over to Pro, and there we go. So there we go, you can see the difference there between them. Now, remember, everything else is in Core currently, so if you had one instrument that you wanted to open up in Pro, you could do it like that. That works pretty well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up in Discover mode, the very most basic mode, and see what that looks like. Look how colourful it is. And one thing that I love straight away is the fact that they've got these little tags with labels about what instrument does what. I think that's going to be really useful for people who are really just new to this, or maybe schools, colleges, things like that. I think that's going to be great. Now, something I've noticed is this little symbol down here, and I think that means that it's sort of using clever trickery to make something that wouldn't actually exist in the Discover mode. So that's very much a clarinet. And as I said at the beginning, we're not getting the legato transitions. So that's actually them taking two samples and then creating a crossfade between them, as opposed to a legato, an actual performed legato transition between one note and the next. So let's do the same thing we did before, switch all instances to Discover. And it's 2.86 gigabytes to beat. Oh, and there we go, it's done. So 774 megabytes, which is amazing. Really, really impressive. And let's bounce that down and call that Discover. So much quicker to bounce down already. I believe you can open this in GarageBand, which is also really helpful. It'd be interesting to see if you could one day get something like that on like an iPad, you know, something really small. But this is going to be great, I think. And there we go, it's done. So let's just have a listen to Discover. Well, the first thing to say there is I think the Celeste player must have bribed the recording engineer because they were very loud. So this is an example of the one dynamic layer that we've got here. If you look in the Pro version or even the Core version, which I can do elegantly, it's the soft sound that I was hoping for. So I'm missing that a little bit here, but that's okay. And if I just look through a couple of other things as well, I'd like to hear how the violins sound. And if I compare that to the Core version, so you're getting a little bit more flexibility there. Remember that in the Discover mode, you've also only got the one dynamic layer for that as well. So what we're hearing there, that little crossfade, that difference in volume there is brought out purely under the hood in tweaks. It's not cycling through different dynamic layers. So that's just a little overview of BBCSO. I hope you found this video to be informative. Do watch the videos on Spitfire's channel if you want to learn a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth about it. In terms of whether or not I think it's a wise investment, I think it's possibly the wisest investment you can make if you want to get into orchestral music. You know, I have an iPhone and I started life with, well, not life, but I started in childhood with an iPod Touch, and then that later graduated to an iPhone, and then I got an iPad. The thing I love about all of these things is that when you go from one to the next, there's that feeling of continuity, and I think that's going to be particularly helpful in this library. So download it for free, or £49 if you can afford to pay it. And, you know, you'll probably see yourself upgrading. In fact, I've got friends who weren't typically into this sort of orchestral stuff before, but have already upgraded from Discover to Core. So I think it's going to be a really useful investment for people. The only other thing to add is that in a couple of weeks, I'd love to make a video just creating a piece of music using Discover. So let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in. Do subscribe if you haven't done already. Click like if you like this video. And until next time, stay safe, stay well, and I will catch you all soon.